My guest today is Chris Ayers. Chris, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, David. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, and I got to say, it was really nice to see you in Sandusky, Ohio, at the Code Mash conference last week.
Yeah, it was the first time I saw snow in a couple of years. I live down in Florida, though it is snowing in Florida today, so it
Really?
not here, but up in the Panhandle. But
Uh,
yeah, it was cold up there. Where I guess you're used to that.
it was cold even by North Midwest standards. I'm not going outside today. So you were speaking about a few things at Code Mash. I think you had a couple of sessions there, right?
I had a workshop on GitHub Actions. I've been following and doing a lot with GitHub for a long time, and doing a lot of DevOps stuff. I also run DevOps Days Tampa Bay down here. I also spoke around .NET containerization, so I have a lot of talks on lots of subjects: containers, architecture, Azure, DevOps, coding. So
Awesome.
uh,
Well, let's talk a little bit about containers. Let's start off with definition. What do we mean when we say containers?
Um, containers are different than VMs, where a VM is a full operating system. It boots up, it's big, and usually can be kind of slow. It takes up a lot of resources. And the reason we use containers, usually Linux containers, when I talk about containers, is they're smaller, they're faster. Um, they pretty much all share a Linux kernel, so you can spin up a lot of containers really quick. And on Windows, I use WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, and I use Docker Desktop. Um, and on Mac, I use Docker, and on Linux, I use Docker. So, but you can use Podman and other things. What's
Okay.
great about containers is you can package up software, and it's pretty immutable. You always get the same copy of the software. It's really nice.
Yeah, and there's diving deeper into containers. We were talking off camera about something called dev containers. What is that?
Yeah. So dev containers are a great tool, and the fact that like when containers started up, people would be like, I want to have some tools on my machine, so I'm going to build a VM. And then it was, I'm going to build a container. And so they'd have a Docker file and they'd have to do all these commands. Dev containers have kind of taken that and standardized it. There's actually a dev container spec out at containers.dev. There's tooling now, and it works with like VS Code and JetBrains, GitHub, and all sorts of tooling. But essentially, it's an easy config file to say, I would like a Python dev container. I want to add some extensions and I want to map some ports, or I want a .NET container or Java or Go. And I can package up all the tools I need, all the extensions, all the other little utilities like the Azure CLI. And if I spin it up, I build my dev environment, I start coding, you spin it up, it builds the exact same environment, and you can start coding. Um, so it makes onboarding really simple. I don't have to go
Sure.
through
Two
weeks of
days of building my
requisitioning.
machine.
Yeah, requisitioning software, getting that. Where do I put it? Like, what command do I run? Just a couple of clicks, and the environment's built. 10 minutes.
It sounds awesome. And also I think is people that switch between different projects. You don't have, or maybe even different versions of the same frameworks. They don't need to be constantly installing and uninstalling software and that they may or may not be using for
Yeah,
months
I
later.
mean, I was a consultant for a while, and I can't tell you how many times I needed to install a new version of Node for a customer or a new version of Python for or .NET for dependency, and I broke my machine.
Sure,
Like it,
sometimes those things don't play nicely together. Version 15.2 and version 17.8 might be one might break the other one.
exactly. So that's where we would use NVM, the Node Version Manager, or we'd set up virtual environments and Conda, like all sorts of techniques to kind of get around that. But that still means I have to install and configure lots of things on my machine and tell you in a line, like if we're both working on it, what version is it? What
Yeah.
extension? Like, did you use a different setting for styling and indentation? But I can package all of that up into a dev container. It all is checked in and lives in my repo. And we use the same set of tools, the same versions, the same extensions, the same settings, and it really streamlines that process.
Awesome. What about the same source code if we're working on the same set,
Well,
the same project?
it's all checked in.
Mhm.
Pretty much all of my repos now have a dev container checked in, and they live in the .dev container folder inside your repo. And today, if you like open it up in VS Code and you have the dev container extension, it'll even pop up and say, "Hey, there's a dev container in this repo. Would you like to use it?"
Interesting.
There's a lot of major open source projects that use it. So if you ever want to contribute to Python, the C Python core project uses dev containers. Like Home Assistant, like if you want to do home automation, Home Assistant uses dev containers.
Hmm.
So they're showing up in more and more projects to kind of standardize versions, languages, settings.
Okay, well, let's pivot a little bit here. Tell me a little about code spaces. I know those are related to dev containers,
Oh
but I'm not
yeah.
sure exactly how.
So I'm a big fan of Codespaces out on GitHub. And in GitHub, if you are working in a repo and let's say you're like away from home or you don't have your main dev machine, you can instead checking out the code, you hit the little button at the top and be like open in a code space. And they'll spin up a dev container in the background and launch a web version of VS Code and connect to it. So
Hmm.
in your browser, you're running Visual Studio Code connected to a container, and you can edit and run extensions and compile and debug your app. You can even open ports, and it'll map so that you can like click on links and navigate to your running application. It's awesome. And in GitHub, you can actually go down to like your settings and your code spaces settings. And instead of opening it in your browser, you can ask it to open in your local VS Code. So
Hmm.
that's one of the really cool things about dev containers. I'm not running in like a VM in a window and remote desktop. Like it's VS Code on my desktop. I can
Right.
copy paste, I can resize it. I'm interacting with the native UI on Mac, on Windows, whatever. But all the compute on the back end is in that container. And for code spaces, it's up in the cloud somewhere, like through a VPN, SSL pipe tunnel. And I don't really care too much. I'm running on my local machine, but all the compute's up in the cloud.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get my head around this. That if you the scenario you described earlier, where you're checking a dev container into your source code repository, and Git and GitHub are smart enough to recognize that it's there and ask if you want to use that dev container
Yep.
to do your development. That would be brought down to your local machine, and that container would be running locally
Uh,
on WSL on your local machine. Whereas
so this is the
Codespace is,
big
is running in the cloud. Is that a fair? Have I got that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the shortcoming of dev containers. The shortcoming of dev containers is you have to have Docker locally, and maybe you have to have a powerful enough machine
Hmm.
to run one or more containers. And not everybody does. But with code spaces, like, and we get free minutes every month. If you have a GitHub account, you get some free code space minutes.
Hmm.
So you can spin up the machine, and they have like 2 core and 16 core, all sorts of sizes. What's cool about that is I could take a little Chromebook with me
Okay.
somewhere or a little super underpowered machine, connect to the internet, go out to code spaces and have like a 16 core, 64 gig beast that
Hmm.
I'm connected to in a container doing, ML work potentially uh, from my little Chromebook or browser.
That is very cool. And then everything else just works the same, right? You're working with code and
Yeah.
you're using your same code GitHub commands, or I'm sorry, Git commands
Yep.
to commit and to push and sync your code.
And not everyone uses Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, so there's a lot of other tooling. Like I know a lot of friends who love JetBrains products,
Mhm.
so like
Yeah,
WebStorm or Writer, those all work with Codespaces and GitHub as well. And like I said, it's an open spec, and what's nice is you can pick a lot of base templates. So, like I said, .NET, Python. I use it for Terraform. I use it for Kubernetes. I use it for pretty much anything you can think of because I don't want to have to install and maintain different versions of different things. I just want to pull a container, work on the thing. When I'm done, throw it away and work on the next one. Um, the nice thing that GitHub also added is they have a thing called Dependabot. So Dependabot can like scan your actions and your node and your npm and all that to see if you have outdated packages. It can even scan your dev container if you're using outdated versions of dev container stuff. So it's all part of that ecosystem. It's great.
Got it. And the now I'm looking at some documentation here, and I see for dev containers there's a JSON file that does all the configuration,
Yes.
where you specify all the configuration that this container is going to have, what software is installed. For Codespaces, the UI is pretty simple. You just have an option to, when I created that, I want to know how many cores and I think a couple other things. Do we have this kind of
Yep.
control over Codespaces containers as well?
Under the hood, Codespaces is dev containers. It's
Okay.
just hosted. So if you make your own container dev container file,
Mhm.
say use Python, install these Python libraries, give it these VS Code extensions. On startup, run this command, do a pip install. When you start your project in .NET, map these ports. That's saved, and when Codespaces spin up, it will use that file.
Okay.
But let's say you don't want to go through all that process. Let's say you don't know anything about dev containers, but you want to be able to use it. If you're in Codespaces and you say, just give me a Codespace, they're going to give you this universal image that they built.
Right.
And it has like the latest Java and Node and Python and .NET and Go and Rust and like all the tools already installed and ready. So like you'll get a universal image that has everything. But if you know exactly what you want and there's certain settings and certain things you want defined, you can make your own. You can customize it. You can tweak it.
And that's just a matter of saving a JSON file in your
Yeah.
repository?
Yeah. And VS Code has some really great tooling for this. If you have the dev container extension, you bring up the little palette, you just say add dev container files and it'll ask you. It'll give you like a drop down. Like what base do you want? It could be Ubuntu, it could be Alpine, it could be something specific. And then you go like, what tooling do you want to add? So it can add packages kind of on top of that. Like I want the AZCLI, or I want npm, or I want kubectl or Terraform or whatever, and it'll add those on top of your base
Sure.
image
Or my own custom libraries that
or your own
I've run.
custom libraries. And then there's hooks. So when the container starts, run this. When it rebuilds, run that command. On shutdown, run this command. So tons of
Uh,
flexibility.
Very cool. I know it's a broad subject. We've covered a lot of it. Are there key things that you feel like viewers should know before they get started with this?
There's like if you're using VS Code, install the dev container extension, and there's some options there to try it out. You can actually Google like try dev containers, and there are some repos that Microsoft put out for like try Rust, try Java, and it'll install the packages. You can set breakpoints. You can hit F5 and debug it. You
Hmm.
can open browsers and interact with the browser in your desktop, and it'll hit the breakpoint in the container, even if it's running in GitHub. It's weird and crazy and awesome. Uh,
Like
I've
us.
given like discussions about this and talks on this, like a couple of conferences around the world, and afterwards, people always come up telling me they're going to try it. And at CodeMash, Saduki, one of the organizers, she's like, she fell in love with Codespaces and dev containers after seeing it at Tech Bash a few years
Awesome.
ago. Like it's definitely something that when you experience it, you're like, this solves a lot of my problems. I don't have to fiddle with it. It's checked in, and the project and the configuration to build and run the project are just tied together, and I don't have to remember and document it. Like as I work, I just add the thing I need and I keep going.
Awesome. Where is a good place for people to get started learning about this?
I would say the Visual Studio documentation on dev containers is really good. Visual Studio code is free, and the integrations in that are free. The Codespace documentation on GitHub is free, and they spin it up. You don't have to install Docker or do anything else. You can just do it all from your browser. And then containers.dev is where the spec is, and they list all of the other integrations tools. Uh, and also JetBrains. JetBrains has some good documentation on dev containers as well.
Awesome. Chris, where are you speaking next?
Um, well, I just got into NDC Oslo, so I'm super excited
Congratulations.
about that. That's in May. I'm doing DevSum in Sweden in June. Hoping to get into Techorama Belgium, and the other one I know for sure is VS Live in Vegas in March.
Oh, nice. Wait, you heard about DevSum? You've heard back from DevSum already?
Yeah.
Wow, you must be special. I have not. I have not. The good news is I haven't been rejected.
This is my 4th year there, I think.
Yeah,
3rd or 4th.
It's a great conference.
Wonderful people. Love the country. Love the city. I always enjoy going up to the Nordics and that area of the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Chris, thanks so much. This has been really educational.
What good's technology if you can't share it with your friends?